A nuclear test is more than just a scientific experiment. It's a declaration of power, a demonstration to the world that a nation possesses the ultimate weapon. Each detonation is a message, both to allies and adversaries, that the country is willing and able to wield unimaginable force. Detonating a nuclear weapon, whether underground or in the atmosphere, releases energy far beyond any conventional bomb. The sheer scale of destruction is almost impossible to comprehend, with temperatures hotter than the sun and shock waves that can flatten entire cities in an instant. These tests signal a country's intent to advance its nuclear arsenal, making the world less secure. They send ripples of fear and uncertainty through the international community, raising tensions and fueling suspicion among nations. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki reminds us of the catastrophic potential of these weapons. The devastation left behind serves as a haunting warning of what can happen if nuclear arms are ever used again. A single test can trigger an arms race, as rivals feel pressured to respond in kind. This cycle of escalation can quickly spiral out of control, drawing more countries into a dangerous competition for nuclear dominance. The environmental cost is staggering. Radioactive fallout can travel thousands of miles, contaminating soil, water, and food for generations. Entire ecosystems can be poisoned, and the effects may linger for centuries, long after the test itself is forgotten. Even underground tests risk leaking radiation into groundwater, threatening the health of communities and wildlife far beyond the blast zone. Health consequences include cancer and genetic mutations, affecting people far from the test site. Children born years later can suffer from birth defects, and entire populations may face increased risks of illness. The scars left on the planet are permanent. Craters, abandoned towns, and poisoned land serve as grim reminders of the destructive power unleashed. Recognizing these dangers, the world created treaties like the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, aiming to prevent further devastation and promote global security. While not all nations have ratified it, the CTBT established a global norm against testing. This agreement represents a collective hope for a safer future, where restraint prevails over aggression. For over 2 decades, most countries have respected this unofficial ban, choosing diplomacy and dialogue over dangerous displays of force. Breaking this norm isn't just about testing a weapon, it's a direct challenge to global security. It threatens the fragile trust that keeps the world from the brink of disaster. It undermines the idea that humanity can collectively manage its most dangerous technologies. Cooperation and trust are essential to prevent catastrophe. A new test by a major power like Russia would shake the foundations of international stability, forcing nations to reconsider their own security and possibly reigniting old rivalries. The world would be forced to confront the possibility of a new nuclear arms race, with all the risks and uncertainties that come with it. The stakes are nothing less than the safety of the planet. Every test puts our shared future at risk, threatening not just nations, but all life on Earth. This is why every nuclear test matters. The consequences reach far beyond borders and generations, reminding us that the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow. In this tense and uncertain climate, where global tensions are already running high, the United States has drawn a hard and unmistakable line in the sand. Washington has issued a direct and urgent demand. Russia must immediately halt all preparations for nuclear testing, making it clear that any such action will trigger severe and far-reaching consequences. A Russian nuclear test would be interpreted as a direct threat to international peace and security, undermining decades of efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation. The US and its NATO allies see such a move as deeply destabilizing, potentially signaling Russia's willingness to cross lines that have held since the Cold War. If a test goes unanswered, it could embolden other nations to follow suit, risking a dangerous new arms race and unraveling existing treaties. Should Russia ignore the demand, America would respond not only with condemnation, but also with swift and coordinated action. The president would address the world in a somber broadcast, framing Russia's move as reckless, irresponsible, and a threat to global stability. Diplomatically, the US would immediately push for a UN Security Council resolution, seeking to rally the international community. America would work tirelessly to unite its allies and partners, aiming to isolate Moscow on the world stage. Harsh economic sanctions would follow, targeting Russia's economy, key industries, and top leadership, increasing the pressure on Moscow. The message would be unmistakable. Breaking the nuclear test ban comes with a high and unavoidable price. Any sign of weakness or hesitation would be seen as an invitation for further escalation, so America would act decisively and visibly. The already fragile relationship between the two nuclear powers would enter a far more dangerous and unpredictable phase, with the world watching anxiously. For Moscow, resuming nuclear tests would be a calculated move. The Kremlin would frame it as a response to Western threats and a way to ensure its nuclear arsenal's reliability. Defying American demands would assert Russia's sovereignty and rally domestic support. The type of test matters. A low-yield tactical weapon signals new battlefield capabilities, while a large ICBM test challenges the US directly. Each scenario is choreographed to send a message of strength. Russia would weigh the backlash against perceived military and political gains. The leadership might believe they can withstand sanctions and exploit global divisions. By testing, Russia bets it can reshape the security landscape in its favor. It's a high-stakes gamble with global consequences. If Russia detonates a nuclear device, the US and its allies would unleash unprecedented economic sanctions. These would target Russian oil, gas, banks, and state corporations, aiming to cripple the economy. Assets of top officials and oligarchs would be frozen, and travel bans imposed. The goal: create intense pressure within Russia's leadership. Diplomatically, Russian ambassadors would be expelled, and Moscow pushed out of international forums. The message: a nation that tests nuclear weapons cannot be a global partner. America would rally countries worldwide to join the campaign of isolation. Some nations might hesitate, but the gravity of a nuclear test would make neutrality difficult. The effort would test America's ability to lead a global coalition. The world's response would shape Russia's future on the international stage. Sanctions aren't the only response. Military options would also be on the table, signaling a much more serious phase of confrontation. The US and its allies would need to weigh every move carefully, knowing the stakes are higher than ever. The Pentagon would immediately raise alert levels, deploying strategic assets and mobilizing key forces to signal readiness. This show of force is meant to deter further escalation, but it also increases the risk of miscalculation. US and NATO forces could be rapidly reinforced in Europe, with new missile defenses installed and additional troops deployed to vulnerable regions. These moves would be designed to reassure allies and send a clear warning to Russia. This would create a tense, heavily armed standoff along Russia's borders, with both sides on edge and ready to respond at a moment's notice. A direct strike on a Russian test site is possible, but extremely risky, potentially triggering a wider war or even a nuclear exchange, with devastating consequences for the world. Most world leaders would see this as a last resort, only to be considered if all other options have failed and the threat is truly imminent. The US might also conduct large-scale military exercises or threaten to resume its own nuclear tests, sending a powerful message of resolve to both adversaries and allies. Such moves would escalate the arms race, making diplomacy harder and increasing the risk of a new, dangerous era of competition. The risk of miscalculation would soar as both sides operate under intense pressure and with little room for error. In this high-stakes game, a single mistake or misunderstanding could have catastrophic, irreversible consequences for millions. The world would be closer to nuclear conflict than at any time in decades, teetering on the edge of disaster with every passing hour. The world's response to a Russian nuclear test would be divided. America's closest allies, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, would condemn Moscow and join sanctions. For them, it's a direct threat to global security. China, caught between its anti-testing stance and partnership with Russia, would likely call for restraint and avoid punishing Moscow. Many developing nations would express concern but avoid sanctions, wary of choosing sides. Economic ties and fear of escalation would drive their caution. The world would split into three camps: the Western Bloc, China-led neutrality, and non-aligned nations. This fractured response would make it harder to pressure Russia. The crisis would highlight the limits of American leadership in a multipolar world. Global unity would be elusive at a critical moment. A nuclear test devastates the environment and endangers human health. Fallout spreads radioactive particles across continents, contaminating land, water, and food for generations. Exposure leads to cancer, birth defects, and genetic mutations, sometimes far from the test site. Radioactive materials enter the food chain, affecting plants, animals, and people. Underground tests risk contaminating aquifers, poisoning drinking water. History offers grim lessons. The Marshall Islands and Kazakhstan still suffer from past tests. A new Russian test would reopen old wounds and create new ones. The environmental scars would last for centuries. The human cost is incalculable. The world would inherit a toxic legacy. A Russian nuclear test would trigger a crisis at the United Nations. The US and allies would push for a Security Council resolution condemning Russia and imposing sanctions. But Russia's veto would block any meaningful action, exposing a flaw in the UN system. The issue would move to the General Assembly, where a symbolic condemnation could highlight Russia's isolation. The crisis would test the UN's relevance and the strength of global governance. If the UN can't act, it raises questions about its future. The world would see that powerful nations can act with impunity. The credibility of international institutions would suffer. The limits of the post-war order would be laid bare. The ultimate goal must be to step back from the brink. A Russian nuclear test would bring the world dangerously close to conflict. Escalation could spiral out of control, risking catastrophe. De-escalation and diplomacy are essential, even when tensions are high. Back channels between Washington and Moscow must remain open. Third-party mediators, like China or India, could help facilitate dialogue. The UN Secretary General could call for restraint and negotiations. The crisis could spur renewed arms control efforts and new treaties. The lesson is clear. Nuclear weapons make the world unsafe. Avoiding nuclear conflict is humanity's most urgent task. Our survival depends on collective action and wise leadership.